Dad, save me. It hurts so much. This was the last call my daughter Fiona made to me. She was only 18 years old, but her life was cruelly taken away. I knelt in front of her body, crying my heart out. Fiona, it's Daddy's fault. Daddy is sorry for you. Despair and anger consumed me. Why? Who? Who took my daughter's life? I, Johnson, was an unknown middle-aged man who ran an inconspicuous tea house. My life was ordinary, but full of hardships. I cherish most in my life is my daughter Fiona. This kind, innocent girl who always smiles is everything in my life. However, the sudden bad news broke my peaceful life. Fiona was forced into a desperate situation by several powerful children of Gaofeng Academy, and eventually fell to her death. My world collapsed, but when I was looking for the truth, I found that the academy, the powerful, and the police station all chose to work together to cover up the facts. From then on, I was no longer the ordinary forbearing father, but an angry lone wolf, determined to seek justice for my daughter in my own way. The bizarre murders one after another filled the city with fear and brought the police station's investigation to a dead end. People discovered that everyone involved in killing Fiona was killed in bizarre and extreme ways, without any escape. At this moment, with the help of a mysterious power, I gradually transformed from a mortal into an avenger who controls life and death. Every trial makes my heart colder, but it also brings me one step closer to the truth. The road of revenge I embarked on is not only to atone for my daughter's sins, but also a silent accusation against this dark world. As the evil spirits continued to devour me, my power became stronger, but the price was the gradual alienation of my body. This is a crazy story about a father who is willing to fall into the abyss and dance with the devil in order to restore his dignity and family affection. My existence is like a raging black flame, illuminating the good and evil deep in human nature, and also igniting everyone's fear. Chapter 1. My small tea house, called Chungfeng, is located in a corner of the city, quiet and plain. I opened the tea house not for making money, but just to accompany my daughter Fiona to school here. She only comes back once a week, but being able to see her is my greatest satisfaction. Today, the tea house is still deserted. The photo of father and daughter on the table warms my heart. Fiona is well-behaved and sensible, always telling me interesting stories about her school. She is the hope of my life, and I have even saved up her future dowry. Suddenly, the cell phone rang. It was Fiona calling. Dad, save me, it hurts. The voice on the phone was intermittent, as if the signal was unstable. My heart suddenly rose to my throat. She had always been a child who only reported good news and never caused trouble. How could this happen today? Fiona, what's wrong with you? Don't scare Dad. I'll be there soon. But what came from the other end of the phone was her last intermittent sentence. Dad, I will repay you for raising me in the next life. After the call ended, my mind went blank, and all the blood rushed to my head. I rushed out the door and headed straight for the school. But what greeted me was the twisted figure downstairs of the dormitory. Her body, her blood, and the pink phone case in her hand. My daughter is really gone. He was so sad that he closed his eyes and fainted. Chapter 02. I woke up from my coma and found myself lying in the hospital, with N4 drip still flowing in. The first thing that came to my mind was the heart-wrenching fact that Fiona was dead. My daughter, my only relative, was sentenced to death. The scene of jumping off the building replayed in my mind like a nightmare. I would rather believe that all this was an illusion, but the sound of the phone ringing brought me back to reality. Johnson, you have been accused of assaulting Aaliyah. Please go to the police station immediately. By the way, claim your daughter's body. This sentence was like a sharp knife piercing my chest. After pulling out the needle, I staggered out of the hospital and took a car to the police station. My body felt hollowed out, but halfway through the journey, a video clip from the driver completely shattered my last bit of rationality. In the video, my daughter Fiona was surrounded by 7 or 8 peers and bullied in a corner. Cigarette butts, wine bottles, dirty liquids they laughed at, insulted, beat her, and even forced those disgusting things into her mouth. Fiona's cries pierced my eardrums. Dad, save me. When she was most desperate, she still thought of me, her father. But I failed to protect her. Why? Why her? I smashed the car window angrily, blood all over my hands. But the pain in my heart far exceeded the physical injury. Aaliyah's voice outside the morgue. That Fiona has a bad character to begin with, so it's not surprising that something like this happened. Her father is also a loser, and he even dared to hit me yesterday. Rage swallowed my reason in an instant. I gritted my teeth and rushed in, with only one thought in my mind. I want all of them to pay for Fiona's pain. Chapter 003. I suppressed my anger and walked into the morgue. Under the white sheet was my daughter, Fiona. Her lively appearance appeared in my mind, but now she had become a cold corpse. "Hey, Johnson, you're here." Aaliyah sneered. "You're not done with beating me. Also, your daughter's jumping off the building has nothing to do with the school, but it has affected our reputation. Enrollment has become a problem. You have to be responsible." "Shut up," I yelled, anger burning in my chest. "I watched the video. 7 or 8 people bullied her. Why did no one do anything? Why did the school turn a deaf ear to it? She is my daughter." Aaliyah adjusted her collar and laughed sarcastically. "Maybe the video is fake? Besides, your daughter is usually not indecent, so it's not surprising that something like this happened." "You're talking nonsense." My rationality was shattered, and I punched her like raindrops. Tears blurred my vision. Fiona has been kind and timid since she was a child, and she has never done anything to harm others. Those who pursued her were rejected by her. What right do you have to slander her? The policeman pulled me away. Aaliyah looked disheveled, her face swollen. She gritted her teeth and shouted, "Johnson, this is not over." But I didn't care, and my eyes returned to the corpse. I trembled as I lifted the white cloth. At that moment, I was stunned. It was not Fiona's body, but a silicone mannequin. The face was realistic, but was clearly not her. "Why?" I yelled at the policeman out of control. "What right does the school have to detain my daughter's body?" The policeman whispered, "This is the decision of the school. It's an order from above. We can't do anything about it." I left the police station and sat on the side of the road in a daze. Fiona's figure appeared in front of me. When I was a child, she hugged me and said, "Dad, when I grow up, I want to honor you and travel around the world with you." But now, I can't even bring her body back. At this moment, a deep voice sounded in my ears. "Johnson, you can't beat them. But if you are willing to cooperate with me, we can take revenge on the whole world." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. When I opened them again, there was only endless hatred in my eyes. "I do." Chapter 004. I looked around alertly, but there was no one. It seemed that only I could hear this sound. "Who is it?" I asked loudly. "Don't look for it. I'm in your pocket." The voice was low and distant. I quickly took out all the things, and a hideous wooden sculpture came into view. It was a gift left by an old man in the tea house. Now, the wooden sculpture was emitting black air and seemed to come alive. "I am Feng Wuji, the ancient purple-robed celestial master, sealed here. If you are willing to hand over your soul and merge with me, I will give you the power of revenge." The voice was low and tempting. "But I need to absorb evil souls. Are you willing to cooperate?" I froze. This meant that from now on, my soul no longer belonged to me. But what could be worse than this? I watched my fists clench, and my tears revealed determination. I don't want to become a demon, but the world is unfair. Since justice does not exist, I will become the enemy of this world. Fiona, I will seek justice for you and make this world darker for once. I roared and clenched the wooden sculpture. "I agree." As soon as the words fell, the wooden sculpture turned into black gas and poured into the top of my head. A tearing force filled my whole body. Top University. That damn girl. Why did she die at this time? Aaliyah cursed and was busy recruiting students. As for Fiona's body, she was even more vicious. Spray some perfume to cover up the smell and wait for her father to sign. Then throw it away. "Director, there is movement in the corridor." The assistant reminded in a low voice. "Who let anyone into the corridor?" Aaliyah pushed the door open impatiently and saw a figure walking towards the end. "Hey, who are you? Don't you know you can't enter here?" she shouted. The figure gradually approached, and the voice was as cold as frost. "Aaliyah, do you remember me?" She was startled by the familiar voice. When she saw who it was Fiona's father, Johnson. But this time, he was no longer the desperate madman. Johnson now had a calm face, cold eyes, and murderous intent like a cold blade. What are you doing here?" Aaliyah felt guilty, but pretended to be brave. "This is an academy. If you dare to mess around again, I'll send you in." "Where's my daughter's body?" Johnson asked coldly. His murderous intent was real. But Aaliyah still sneered. "Who knows where her body is? It should have been thrown away long ago. She died in a disgusting way and stained the school." "Enough!" Johnson growled. and his aura suddenly changed, forcing Aaliyah to not dare to move. At this moment, two security guards came in, holding electric batons and pointing them at Johnson. "Who let you in? Get out!" The security guard shouted arrogantly. Johnson slowly turned around, a sinister smile on his face. "You came just in time, so I don't have to go looking for you." As soon as he pointed, the security guard suddenly froze and cried in pain. The next second, crack. The security guard's arm was torn off, and blood splattered, staining the corridor red. Aaliyah looked at the blood on the ground and stepped back in fear. You are crazy. What are you going to do?" Johnson looked at her coldly, his voice cold. "From today on, I will make each of you pay for Fiona's pain." Chapter 005. "Ah, my arm!" The scream of the first security guard echoed in the corridor. His arm was pulled off by an invisible force, and blood was dripping. The scene was horrible. The other security guard was so scared that his face turned pale and his voice trembled. Who are you?" I looked at him quietly, my voice cold and without a trace of warmth. "These hands stopped me at the gate of the school that day and prevented me from seeing my daughter. Since they can't uphold justice, there is no point in keeping them, so it's better to break them off." I hooked my finger, and poof! The arm of another security guard flew out. The electric baton fell to the ground, and blood splattered everywhere. "Stop! We didn't do anything." The third security guard began to beg for mercy. His legs were shaking, but he didn't dare to retreat. Of course he knew what he had done, hiding the body and taking money to keep quiet. Unfortunately, it was too late to atone for his sins. "You've touched my daughter's body. You deserve to die," I said coldly, and hooked my finger again, breaking the third man's arm. Then, the two security guards were pressed against the wall by an invisible force, and the sound of dong, dong, dong echoed in the corridor until they fell to the ground in a bloody mess, without a sound. The air was filled with a strong smell of blood, which made Aaliyah and the instructor beside her retreat subconsciously. The instructor had already started vomiting, and Aaliyah's face was pale and her eyes were full of fear. It was her. It was Aaliyah who asked us to hide the body. All this was ordered by her. The security guard pointed at Aaliyah before he died, his voice weak but trembling. Aaliyah's face turned pale instantly. She was filled with fear and anger. "How dare you betray me? You weren't like this when you were paid." She screamed hysterically, but her trembling body revealed everything. I walked towards her step by step. My eyes were as cold as ice. "Aaliyah, my daughter Fiona is my only relative. I promised to protect her, but I broke my promise. She was such a kind child, but she was forced to jump off the building. All this, you have to pay for it." Aaliyah finally broke down and shouted hoarsely. "Fiona's body is in the storage room on the 4th floor. I've already told you, don't mess around." "Storage room," I repeated coldly, turning and walking towards the window in the corridor. Bang! I punched the glass and shattered it. I looked outside. 8 floors. It should feel pretty good to jump from here. "Director Aaliyah, what do you think?" "No!" Aaliyah screamed in fear and tried to escape, but was lifted up by an invisible force and hung outside the window. The cold wind blew in her face, and she turned pale with fear and screamed madly. "I'm afraid of heights. Please don't kill me. I'm the dean of the school. You can't do this." I approached her and said in a chilling voice, "Afraid of heights? When my daughter jumped from here, she was more terrified than you are. You should experience this kind of despair firsthand. I order you to put me down. I am the dean of the school." Aaliyah had completely collapsed, but I just waved my hand calmly. Her screams became increasingly distant, and then, with a thud, something heavy fell to the ground, and the whole world instantly became quiet. I closed my eyes, seemingly enjoying the pleasure of revenge. However, when I opened them again, tears had already blurred my vision. I thought I would feel good after killing these people, but Fiona will never come back. My daughter will never come back. What I want to do is to completely eliminate the evil in this world. Chapter 006. At this moment, she was completely panicked. I stood in front of her, full of anger, like a demon crawling out of hell. Aaliyah had been thrown down from the 8th floor by me, and the 2 security guards were dead on the spot. She looked at the blood on the ground, trembling, and suddenly knelt down and kowtowed frantically. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. This was not my idea. It was all Aaliyah's fault. We were just following orders." She started to talk incoherently and even made ridiculous excuses. "Fiona. She talked to me before she died. I thought she was a good girl. Hearing this, I laughed a sneer. Take me to the storage room. She stood up quickly, not daring to delay, tremblingly found the key, and took me to the fourth floor. The corridor was dark, and a foul smell hit my nose. Aaliyah had sealed this floor on purpose, fearing that others would smell the odor here. When the female instructor opened the door of the storage room, the strong stench hit her in the face, almost suffocating her. My steps suddenly slowed down. Time seemed to have stopped, and the scene before my eyes chilled me to the bone. A tall trash can came into view, and the stench was coming from there. I suppressed my suspicions and walked over with heavy steps. The moment I opened the lid of the trash can, tears burst out of my eyes. It's her. It's my daughter, Fiona. She was thrown into the bucket like garbage, with twisted limbs, tattered clothes, and blood all over her body. I used to treat her as the apple of my eye, afraid that she would fall or starve, but now she is abandoned like a piece of waste cloth. Her expression remained in a moment of pain and despair, as if she had experienced inhuman torture before her death. My daughter! I hugged her, tears streaming down my face, my voice hoarse. Didn't you say that you would accompany me to buy new clothes during the holidays? Why did you? I hugged her cold and stiff body tightly, feeling heartbroken. I saw her bones penetrate her skin. Her eyes were beaten to one, and there was no intact part of her body. At this moment, the only thing left in my world is hatred. Tell me who bullied her. I turned around suddenly and looked at the trembling female instructor. Her face turned pale, and she couldn't even stand steadily. I don't know. I just heard that Fiona is unhappy at school recently, and I really don't know anything else. Hi, you don't know? I sneered, tears still hanging on my face. You clearly helped them hide the body, and now you say it's none of your business? The female instructor shook her head desperately, her voice trembling. I was just following orders. I didn't mean it. You didn't mean it? I stared at her, the anger in my heart completely devouring my rationality. I waved my hand, and black air surged out from my palm, instantly enveloping her. She was trembling all over. Her eyes were deathly pale, and black blood began to seep out of her 7 orifices. Ah! She screamed in despair. Her bones were crushed bit by bit, and her body was twisted and deformed like a rag doll. I looked at her and said in a voice as cold as ice, "The gates of hell are open for you, go." Chapter 007. The black smoke seemed to have life and entered her pupils, echoing in her ears along with the shrill wailing. The sound did not seem to come from the human world, but rather a whisper straight to hell, causing her to tremble all over and collapse to the ground. She opened her mouth to beg for mercy, but only intermittent moans came out. I stood in front of her quietly, my eyes cold as ice, holding my daughter's cold body. The pain in my heart had burned into anger. Her arms and legs were instantly broken by the black air and fell to the ground like a rag doll. Don't you have a lot to say? I sneered and looked down at her. Why don't you say anything now? Her face was pale, and her eyes were full of despair. I saw the black mist beneath her feet gradually turning into an abyss, like a demon from hell opening its mouth, ready to devour everything. She let out a final whine, and then her body suddenly tilted and died. I casually threw her body into the trash can. My eyes fell back to the cold and stiff body in my arms, my daughter, my Fiona. Her clear eyes and life were now stained by sin. Her once lively and jumping little hands could no longer hold me. I held back my tears and slowly walked out of the school gate, my steps heavy but firm. An hour later, the police cordoned off the scene. "Captain, we have found out everything." Lishime walked up to Roberto with the report. 3 dead, 1 seriously injured. Seriously injured? Roberto took the report and looked through it, his expression gradually becoming solemn. It was Director Aaliyah. She jumped from the 8th floor and landed on a car, barely surviving. Lishime said in a low voice, "What about the others?" The 2 security guards had their arms broken and their skulls shattered. They looked like humans. As for the female instructor, Lishime hesitated for a moment. Her entire body was almost crushed, and she was stuffed into a trash can. Hearing this, Roberto frowned, stared at the forensic report, and said in a deep voice, "This injury cannot be caused by a human." The surveillance footage was then called up. In the blurry video, they saw everything. I just flicked my finger, and the 2 security guards' arms flew away from their bodies, and then they smashed their skulls like mad dogs. And Aaliyah was like being controlled by an invisible force, with her feet off the ground, and was slowly sent out the window. There was dead silence in the monitoring room. Is this something a human could do? Someone asked tremblingly. Roberto lit a cigarette and took a deep puff. Catch him now. A few hours later, I held my daughter's body and knelt in front of her newly erected tombstone, tears in my eyes. Daughter, Daddy still has things to do. I will come back to be with you after I finish all this. I stood up, wiped my tears, and turned to walk towards the police station. The police around me pointed their guns at me, but I didn't resist. Revenge was not over yet, and I didn't want to waste time dealing with them. Chapter 009. In the interrogation room, Roberto threw a report in front of me with a cold face and said straight to the point. 3 people died in Gaofeng Academy, and 1 was seriously injured. All clues point to you, and the surveillance camera also captured your figure. Johnson, plead guilty, and you can still get leniency. I picked up the report and flipped through it casually. A sneer appeared on the corner of my mouth, and I threw the report on the table. Aaliyah is lucky. She can survive after falling from the 8th floor. But is this lucky or unfortunate for her? Bang! Roberto slapped the table, trying to stun me. He shouted viciously, Johnson, you admit it, right? Tell me how you killed the person. I raised my head. My eyes were as sharp as a knife, piercing his heart. At that moment, I clearly saw the cold sweat sliding down his forehead. What about 3 lives? I said coldly. Their deaths are not worth even a hair of my daughter's head. I slammed a report on the injury assessment on the table and shouted, how many days was my daughter's body hidden? She was tortured beyond recognition before she died. No one cared. No one asked. Now that a few people have died in the school, you are mobilizing troops? Is the power of the police used to protect the evildoers? The interrogation room fell into silence. Roberto and Li Xinmei were stunned by my anger. You know what? I sneered. This is just the beginning. If my daughter doesn't get justice, more people will die. At this time, a patrolman came in and reported quietly. Captain, a parent from Gaofeng Academy, wants to see Johnson to discuss Fiona's matter. Okay. I stood up. I want to see what tricks she can play. Outside the interrogation room, a lady wearing designer clothes and jewels stood there with her daughter Caroline and several bodyguards. Caroline had a savage face that I was very familiar with. She was the one who slapped my daughter the most in the video. The lady handed over a suitcase filled with cash, about 2 million yuan. This is compensation for you, but you have to help me clarify one thing. The video on the internet was just a conflict between ordinary students. It has nothing to do with my daughter. Mom, why are you talking to him like that? Caroline sneered. Fiona is just a poor bastard. She deserves to be beaten by us. So, what if she dies? Our family has plenty of money. We can handle everything. Her arrogant voice pierced my heart like a needle. Can money buy life? Can it buy back my daughter's life? I raised my head and stared at Caroline, with crazy flames burning in my eyes and a sly smile on my lips. Caroline, how about this? I use these 2 million to buy your life. Chapter 010. How dare you threaten my daughter? The lady's face turned pale in an instant. She slammed her handbag down and stared at me. Caroline stood aside, smiled contemptuously, and crossed her arms. Mom, why bother talking to him? Poor people like him need money to beat them down. Isn't it just a loss of a daughter who has a cheap life? It's good enough to let him stand here and talk. She raised her chin and said sarcastically, I tell you, she deserved to be beaten that day. Oh, by the way, did you know? Before she got into trouble, she called you and cried, Daddy, save me. But how did she die in the end? It was because you were useless and couldn't save her. These words stabbed into my heart like a knife, but my expression did not change at all. I just looked at them indifferently with a sneer on the corner of my mouth. Do you really think this matter can be forgotten? I stared at Caroline, my voice as cold as ice. Johnson, calm down. Li Xinmei hurriedly stood in front of me, trying to dissuade me. This is the police station. Let's talk it over. Don't be impulsive. I glanced at her and laughed softly, my tone full of sarcasm. Talk it over? This is the police station, yes, but do you think they will give me and my daughter justice? Johnson, stop talking. If you really... Li Xinmei wanted to persuade her again, but was interrupted by the lady. Stop talking nonsense. You lunatic, you dare to touch my daughter. I will make your whole family pay the price. The lady threatened coldly. I've been sincere enough in this matter. Take these 2 million, and let's put an end to this matter. I looked down at the suitcase she brought, shook my head slightly, and looked up at her directly. Do you think my daughter's life is worth 2 million? The lady paused for a moment, but then sneered. Don't be ungrateful. People like you can't even see 2 million. It's a favor for me to give you money. Oh, 2 million. I smiled slightly, turned my gaze to Caroline, and said in a cold but calm voice, why not use the 2 million to buy her life? Before he finished speaking, the air seemed to freeze instantly. Caroline was stunned, and then she flew into a rage. How dare you threaten me? I am from the Gung family, and my father can make you bankrupt with just a flick of his finger. I slowly approached her and said calmly, you can continue to curse me, but the more you curse, the greater the price you may pay. Her face turned pale in an instant. Johnson, stop it. Roberto tried to stop. You've already lost your daughter. Don't go to extremes. This is the police station. Is there anything we can't talk about? Talk. I turned around and sneered. My daughter was tortured and her body was hidden in the academy after her death. Did you talk about it? Who of you spoke for her? Is her life so cheap? The police station was completely silent. Everyone had a complicated expression on their face, and no one dared to step forward to stop me. I spoke slowly, my voice low but unquestionable. From today on, everyone involved in this incident will pay the price for her. Caroline finally couldn't hold it anymore and took a step back tremblingly. You don't do anything rash. My father is the chairman of the Gung family. Just try to touch me. I smiled and whispered, Caroline, no matter how powerful your father is, he can't save you. Chapter 11. The patrolmen were stunned and took a few steps back, staring at the paper figure in my hand with complicated eyes. What on earth is this? Someone whispered, a paper figure. How could it be possible? Caroline collapsed to the ground in pain, her face pale, her forehead covered with cold sweat. She struggled desperately to stand up, but she was too weak. She looked down at her empty arm and screamed heartbreakingly. My hand. It hurts. It hurts. Help me. She looked at me with fear in her eyes, as if she was looking at a devil. I stared at her coldly, my voice cold and calm. Does it hurt? Are you desperate? This is just the beginning. Don't be afraid, my daughter. Mom is here. The lady rushed to Caroline's side and consoled her incoherently. The ambulance will be here soon. We have plenty of money. The doctor will be able to put your hand back. It's okay, don't be afraid. She frantically pressed her hands on Caroline's wound, but couldn't stop the blood from flowing out. Her eyes were full of despair. She turned to look at me and shouted angrily. Johnson, you lunatic. Why did you hurt my daughter? She is my life. Do you know her identity? How dare a poor person like you touch her? Poor people. I sneered and looked at her directly. In your eyes, we are poor people, so even our lives are worthless, right? Caroline lying on the ground and said in a slow and cold voice, where is my daughter? She is my life too. But you killed her and she is still alive. Before she died, did anyone ask her if she was in pain? Did anyone care about her feelings? The lady's face turned pale and her lips trembled, but she couldn't utter a word. I slowly raised the paper figure in my hand, brushed it lightly with my fingertips, and said in a steady tone, Caroline, now you should understand what true despair is, right? Stop it. Johnson, calm down. Roberto couldn't help yelling. This is the police station. No one can save you if you do this. I looked at him with an unquestionable coldness in my tone. I don't need anyone to save me. I just want justice. Today, my daughter will no longer remain silent, and you all have to give her an explanation. When the lady heard this, the color drained out of her face. She cried and shouted, Kill him for me. I'll give each of you 1 million. Take the paper figurine from him. The man in black beside her obeyed the order and stepped forward, but before he could get close to me, he was pushed back by an invisible force and fell to the ground, his face full of fear. I watched everything in front of me quietly, ignoring their struggles, and my eyes fell on Caroline again. You always think that money can buy everything, but unfortunately my daughter's life cannot be bought back with money. After saying that, I lightly stroked the paper figure with my finger. Caroline suddenly screamed, collapsed to the ground, and curled up into a ball, unable to speak in such pain. There was complete silence in the police station. Everyone was shocked by this scene. I turned my head, my dark eyes swept over everyone, and I said word by word, No one who bullied my daughter will be able to escape. Chapter 012. Caroline collapsed to the ground, her voice so hoarse that it was almost inaudible. She was just a torso, shaking helplessly. Blood was flowing along the floor, and her expression was confused, as if she was about to collapse. Fiona, I was wrong. Don't come over, she murmured, her eyes unfocused, as if she had seen some hallucination. I didn't mean it. I just thought it was fun to bully you. She began to laugh and cry alternately, spewing out one name after another. Xiao Jie, Sun Tianyu, Wang Shuzhen, Kong Liyuan. They're also involved. Why don't you look for them? Hearing these names, I sneered and memorized the names of these criminals. Today is just the beginning. No one who killed my daughter will escape. What should I do, Captain? Li Shimei stamped her feet anxiously in the police station, but she was completely helpless. Fiona, I was really wrong. I shouldn't have laughed at you, taken my anger out on you, and I shouldn't have teamed up with others to bully you. Please let me go. Caroline's voice became increasingly low. She tried to admit her mistakes to the invisible phantom, her eyes full of fear and despair. I looked at her coldly, my tone calm. If admitting one's mistakes can make up for it, then what is the use of the police department in this world? The next second, I threw the paper man to the ground and stepped hard on it. Crack! A crisp sound was heard, like the echo of a broken bone. Caroline's body shook violently. She couldn't make any sound. She could only open her mouth. Her eyes were empty and dull. Her whole body was limp and powerless. Her last bit of spirit also disappeared at that moment. My daughter, Caroline, open your eyes and look at me. The lady rushed over, hugged Caroline's cold body, and burst into tears. Her howling echoed throughout the police station, piercing everyone's eardrums. This was the first time she felt such deep despair. Her spoiled daughter had left in such a tragic way. No mother could bear such a blow. Johnson, she suddenly raised her head, her eyes red and her face full of tears. You killed my daughter. You are a demon. I will kill you. She rushed towards me like crazy, her eyes full of hatred. But the moment she got close, I raised my hand and gently threw her to the ground. She struggled to stand up, but she had no strength left. I looked down at her, my voice as cold as ice in winter. Your daughter is alive, but my daughter is not? Everything she went through was 1,000 times more painful than this. Now it's your turn to pay back. Roberto finally came to his senses and shouted hurriedly. Quick, send Mrs. Gung to the hospital. The police hurriedly carried the lady away, and the whole police station was in chaos. Carolina's body lay quietly on the ground, and everyone was silent. I was taken back to the interrogation room, and this time Roberto interrogated me personally. He stared at me and said in a low voice, Johnson, why did you kill someone? We saw it with our own eyes. Are you still trying to quibble? I held a cup of tea, looking calm. Murder? What evidence do you have? Roberto was stunned. Caroline the whole time. I took a sip of tea, my voice piercingly calm. If insulting is a crime, then you could just lock me up for a few days. But that lady just wanted to kill me, and I was just defending myself. You can all testify to that. The interrogation room fell into dead silence, and everyone was speechless. Chapter 013. Shock and helplessness in the police station. Li Shimei and Roberto looked heavy-faced, exhausted, and powerless. Roberto had worked in the police station for so many years and had never felt such a sense of defeat. Let him go. Finally, he sighed. Johnson left. They took the video directly to the headquarters. After watching the video, the general manager slammed the table in anger and said, Nonsense. How dare you use a special effects video to fool me? Roberto hurriedly explained. Chief, this video is not fake at all. The whole process is real. All the police can testify that Johnson is really weird. Is this real? The director watched the video again and again, frowning in disbelief. In the video, Carolina's limbs were pulled down from the air, and her body seemed to be crushed by an invisible force. And during the whole process, Johnson didn't even touch her. Killing people from a distance? How is that possible? The general manager rubbed his temple. His outlook on life was almost overturned. Director, Li Shimei said solemnly, Johnson's daughter's death made him swear revenge, and there are many people involved in this matter. If we don't take action, Baitsong City may fall into a disaster. The director's face became even uglier. He certainly knew what kind of families were behind the students of Gaofeng Academy. If those parents united, it would be enough to make him lose his position. Go and protect those people. He finally sighed, but be careful not to offend these families. The despair of the Gung family. At the same time, the Gung family was shrouded in grief. Lady Li Lihua locked herself in her room for the whole day, looking haggard. Her face was swollen where Johnson's palm prints were. She had never been so embarrassed, nor so scared. Johnson's calmness and mystery made her feel cold all over. In the evening, Carolina's father, Gung Long, rushed home exhausted. As soon as he entered the door, he shouted, Caroline, Caroline! Li Lihua yelled through the door. Stop shouting. Caroline is gone. Gung Long kicked the door open in shock and froze when he saw his wife's haggard appearance. How could something happen to his pride, his treasure? When Caroline's body was brought in, Gung Long completely collapsed. He looked at his daughter's pale face and her body with her limbs patched up. His knees softened and he fell to the ground, crying loudly. Who did this? Who dares to do this to the Gung family? It's Johnson, Fiona's father. Li Lihua gritted her teeth, her eyes filled with fear and hatred. He wants revenge for his daughter. Gung Long's eyes darkened instantly, and his clenched fists turned white with anger. Johnson, I will make him regret it. The response of the wealthy. At the same time, the Xiao, Sun, Wang, and Kong families gathered in a private club. The luxurious European-style decoration showed their wealth. These wealthy parents in Baitsong City gathered together, obviously for Johnson's matter. Caroline from the Gung family died tragically. I heard that she was tortured to death by the police. Zhao Jie's mother Chao Xiaomei said with a hint of disdain. How dare a poor guy who runs a tea house challenge us? Why don't we all pool some money and kill Johnson? Chao Xiaomei suggested. People like him are a threat as long as they are alive. Not right. Sun Tianyu's mother Jiang Xuelan wiped her mouth elegantly and said calmly, Johnson is not simple. We must be cautious before we touch him. Otherwise, the Gung family will be a lesson for us. For a moment, the whole room fell silent. No 014, 15. Confrontation and conflict. Chao Xiaomei's face was gloomy, and her tone was full of disdain. Jiang Xuelan, now is a good time to deal with Johnson. Do you really plan to wait for him to come to your door before fighting back? She put the glass down heavily and sneered. The Gung family incident is not a warning. Johnson has already said that he will not let go of anyone involved in this incident. Do you think he will let your son go? Jiang Xuelan still had a smile on her face, and her tone was calm, but with a hint of coldness. Of course not. But the more this is the case, the more we can't be impatient. Everyone, we are all in the same boat, and any rash actions will only put us in a passive position. She glanced at her phone and said, Yesterday, Fiona's injury assessment report was on the hot search list, and now the whole network is paying attention to it. Combined with the previous video, what do you think those netizens will think? Several people were suddenly speechless. Jiang Xuelan took a sip of red wine and continued. The matter has become a big deal. If we don't handle it properly now, we will all be caught in the whirlpool of public opinion. The best way is to find the publisher of the report, Liang Hui. She glanced at the people present and said, as long as Liang Hui is willing to issue a statement to clarify that the appraisal is fake, public opinion will change. When the storm is past, we can secretly deal with Johnson and solve the problem once and for all. That sounds nice, Chao Xiaomei sneered. We, the Xiao family, can handle this kind of thing. Using manpower to solve problems is easy for us. Liang Vietakid. At midnight, Liang Hui's clinic was silent. He just took a sip of coffee, stared at the hot search on the screen, rubbed his dry eyes, and muttered to himself, Fiona, Uncle will definitely seek justice for you. He didn't know that danger was approaching at this moment. There were several hurried knocks on the door. Liang Hui frowned and thought, it's so late. Who would come to see a doctor? He hesitated for a moment and walked over to open the door. As soon as the door opened, someone grabbed his hair and dragged him out. Help! Call the police! Liang Hui struggled desperately, his voice tearing the night sky. But he was soon pinned to the ground by several thugs in black suits. He was horrified to see 3 black cars parked in front of the clinic, and standing next to the cars was a gorgeously dressed woman, Chao Xiaomei. Chao Xiaomei approached slowly, playing with a cigar cutter in her hand, with a sneer on her lips. You are Liang Hui? You wrote that injury report, right? You are quite courageous. She leaned over, looked at Liang Hui's embarrassed appearance, and said coldly, Now, I'll give you a chance. Issue a statement to clarify and publicly admit that the report is forged or... She raised the knife in her hand. I'll let you taste the feeling of having your fingers cut off. Liang Hui gritted his teeth, cold sweat on his forehead. He was afraid, but more angry. Fiona's story is true. You killed her, and you still want to cover up the truth? Don't even think about it. Chao Xiaomei snorted coldly. A poor doctor like you still talks about justice? I tell you, for people like you, life and death are just a matter of my thoughts. As she spoke, she placed the knife on Liang Hui's finger, her eyes cold. You'd better think it over. This is not a joke. Just as the blade was about to fall, A deep voice broke the silence. Let him go. The person you are looking for is me. Everyone looked up and saw a man slowly approaching. He was wearing a white sports suit, which made him look particularly clean, but his eyes were as cold as frost in winter. Johnson, Liang Hui yelled. Go. Call the police. They won't let you go. Xiao Xiaomei sneered. So you were Johnson. She glanced at Johnson and said disdainfully, I thought you were some powerful figure, but you are nothing more than this. Johnson stood still, his eyes swept over her and the thugs, the corners of his mouth slightly raised, but his tone was extremely cold. The son you taught killed my daughter. Now it's your turn to pay. Xiao Xiaomei's face changed, and then she laughed. Repay? With you? Come on, break his legs. Johnson with steel pipes, and the leader swung the steel pipe and smashed it down. However, just as the steel pipe was about to fall, the man screamed, fell to the ground, and rolled over in pain, holding his knees. On my leg! He looked at his knee in horror. The entire joint was twisted at a strange angle, as if it was broken by an invisible force. Liang Hui was stunned. The other men in black also stopped, their eyes full of horror. How? How is this possible? Johnson looked coldly at the man in black who fell to the ground and said indifferently, I don't want to kill innocent people, but you are evil people, and you deserve it. Xiao Xiaomei was stunned for a moment. Then she came to her senses and shouted, Go! Kill him! Chapter 016. The black-clad men around him stared at their fallen companion with wide eyes. They saw with their own eyes that the man seemed to be lifted up by an invisible force, suspended in midair, struggling but unable to escape. Then, puff! With a muffled sound, his body suddenly shrank, as if crushed by an invisible giant hand, and turned into a cloud of blood mist. The bright red liquid spilled all over the ground, splashing all over the faces of the people around him. The air was filled with a strong smell of blood, and everyone was stunned for a moment. These people who were used to seeing violence were now shivering all over, with fear written all over their eyes. How is this possible? A man in black said in a trembling voice. They had never seen such a scene before, where someone could kill someone in the air with just a wave of his hand. Xiao Xiaomei was also splashed with blood. She was stunned for a moment, then screamed, Devil! You, what kind of monster are you? I looked at her coldly, my eyes as sharp as a knife. Monster? This is just the beginning. Before I finished speaking, I looked around at the trembling men in black and said, Today, none of you will be able to leave. This sentence was like an ice knife, piercing everyone's heart. How could they dare to stay? They ran away. But just after taking a few steps, one of them suddenly screamed and fell to the ground, twitching all over. I didn't move, but just raised my hand slightly, and another person fell heavily, as if restrained by some force. The murderous intent in my eyes gradually turned cold. Anyone who hurts others should pay the price. The men in black fell one after another, as if their fate was controlled by an invisible hand. Cho Sumi's despair. Xiao Xiaomei had already collapsed on the ground in fear. She pointed at me with a trembling hand and said in a sharp voice, You dare to kill me? I'm from the Feijia group. Do you know how big our background is? So what if your daughter is dead? I can give you money so that you can live a good life again. I can give you things that a poor person like you will never have the chance to enjoy in your lifetime. She almost screamed, her tone full of resentment and fear. I slowly approached her and sneered. Money? Do you think money can buy back my daughter? What do you people think of life? I tell you, human life is priceless. Before she finished her words, I moved my fingers slightly and her legs suddenly trembled violently. Then she fell to the ground with a twisted angle. Ah! Xiao Xiaomei screamed in pain, covering her twisted legs with both hands. Her voice was hoarse but filled with tears for mercy. Don't kill me. I'll give you money, a lot of money. I was wrong, please. I looked down at her, my eyes as cold as ice. My daughter is the price your children paid for trampling on their lives. Her death made me lose the whole world. You should pay for all this. Liang Hui was stunned, cold sweat dripping from his forehead. He trembled and said, Johnson, how did you do it? Those people just now. I patted his shoulder and softened my tone. Brother, don't ask anymore. Don't interfere in this matter anymore. I will seek justice for Fiona. Liang Hui's eyes instantly turned red. He choked up and said, How could I not care about Fiona's affairs? She was such a good child. Why did she end up like this? I was silent for a moment and clenched my fists. That's why I can't let you get involved. You've helped me so much, and I'm very grateful, but from now on, I have to walk this path alone. Liang Hui didn't say anything, but tears were already streaming down his cheeks. Two men in their 40s stood in the bloody night, speechless but crying. In this world, not everyone can have true friends, and I am willing to exchange the loneliness and hatred of this life for justice for Fiona. Chapters 17 to 19. Johnson, who was sitting on a bench. Johnson, where is my mother? Xiao Jie roared. His voice could not conceal his inner fear and anxiety. Johnson slowly raised his eyes. His gaze was cold and calm, as if everything around him had nothing to do with him. He chuckled. Xiao Jie, you killed my daughter. Now, it's time to pay your debt. As soon as he finished speaking, the police car roared in, and Li Xinmei and Roberto led people to the scene. Li Xinmei frowned. Johnson, we need your cooperation in the investigation of what happened last night. Now come with us. Johnson smiled coldly. Where were you when my daughter died tragically? Now it's my turn to seek justice. And you're here. His voice was like a sharp knife, piercing people's hearts. Johnson angrily and shouted, he killed my mother. Catch him. What do the police do? Protect the bad guys. At this moment, a loud noise came from behind, and everyone turned around suddenly, only to see a twisted body falling heavily to the ground. It was Xiao Jie's mother, Qiao Xiumei. She fell from a tall building, blood was everywhere, and the scene was horrible. Mom! Xiao Jie kneeled down and screamed, his eyes filled with disbelief and despair. Johnson stood up, walked slowly towards Xiao Jie, and looked down at him. Xiao Jie, is this what you call a decent life? The glory your mother bought with other people's lives is now gone. How does it feel to have your loved ones die in front of you? Johnson and trembled. It's you. You killed my mother. You devil. Li Xinmei and Roberto looked at Johnson nervously, but they could not explain what they saw. The surveillance showed that Qiao Xiumei walked up the building alone without any struggle, as if she was pulled down by some invisible force. All this seemed seamless, but it was extremely weird. Xiao Jie, when you harmed my daughter, did you ever think about the retribution you will receive today? Johnson's voice was calm but cold. Xiao Jie gnashed his teeth, tears streaming down his face. Just wait. I will definitely take revenge. I will make you live a life worse than death. Johnson smiled faintly, and his back disappeared from everyone's sight, leaving only one sentence. It's not that I don't want to take revenge. It's just that the time has not come yet. Chapter 020. Johnson sat at the door of his tea house. His eyes fell on the photo of his daughter on the table. His face was calm, but he couldn't hide the pain in his heart. The killings in the past few days made the black energy in his body more and more intense, but he didn't care. He just wanted to seek justice for his daughter. Johnson, there is a big evil man committing a crime 2 streets away. Devour his evil spirit and don't waste time. Feng Wuji's voice suddenly rang in his ears. Johnson put on his coat and followed the instructions into the night. In a dim street, a woman knelt down and begged for mercy. In front of her stood a fierce-looking man, Zhang Baishan, a wanted criminal who had killed 4 people. The woman cried, "Brother, please spare me. I can give you anything except your life." Zhang Baishan sneered and lifted the woman's chin with the tip of the knife. "Be good and listen. I'll give you a quick death. Don't resist." Before he finished speaking, a sound of footsteps broke the deadlock. A man walked over with his hands in his pockets, as calm as if he was taking a walk. "Get away and don't meddle in other people's business." Zhang Baishan shouted angrily. Johnson said calmly, "Zhang Baishan, you have committed numerous crimes, including murder and robbery. Tonight, you should pay for these crimes." Zhang Baishan was enraged and stabbed Johnson with his knife. However, before he could get close to him, Johnson's body flew into the air, as if controlled by an invisible force, and his limbs struggled helplessly. He widened his eyes and said in horror, Who are you?" Johnson smiled coldly, his eyes like knives. "Hell is waiting for you." As soon as he finished speaking, he moved his fingers, and with a crack, Zhang Baishan's neck was broken, his head tilted to one side, and he died instantly. A stream of black air flowed into Johnson's body from the corpse. He closed his eyes and felt the increase in strength with a sneer on his lips. "Next, it's time to move on." Johnson muttered to himself, turning around and preparing to leave. The kneeling woman was still in shock and shouted in a trembling voice, "Big brother, thank you for saving me. Can you leave your name? I will definitely repay you." Johnson didn't look back, but just said coldly, "I'm not trying to save you. After that, he disappeared into the night. The next day, the news of Zhang Baishan's tragic death became a hot topic. After listening to the eyewitness's description, Li Shimei from the patrol bureau suddenly thought of a name: Johnson. His shadow became clearer and clearer, and it became harder to ignore. Chapter 21 to 22. Johnson pushed open the door of the ward, sat down on the chair, and lit a cigarette. Amid the smoke, Aaliyah woke up on the bed, opened her eyes, and saw him. Her face turned pale instantly. "Johnson, why are you here?" Aaliyah's voice was trembling. She curled up in the corner of the bed as if she had seen a ghost, her whole body shaking uncontrollably. Johnson flicked the ash off his cigarette and smiled coldly. "I didn't expect you to be lucky enough to survive after jumping from the 8th floor. Aaliyah, how about reliving the feeling of death again?" Aaliyah screamed and jumped up from the bed, pulled out the needle from her hand, and trembled as she backed away to the wall. No, I'm already like this, and you won't let me go?" she cried, her eyes full of collapse. "I didn't kill your daughter. I just hit her body. Johnson, I'm not guilty of the death penalty. You have no right to judge me." Johnson's eyes were as cold as a knife. "Do you think Fiona is just a corpse? She is my life. Everyone who killed her, even an accomplice like you, will pay the price." Aaliyah completely collapsed and cried for mercy. "This is a hospital. You can't get away if you kill me. Doctors and nurses, help! Help!" Her screams broke the silence. Doctors and nurses gathered outside the door, but the doors and windows seemed to be locked tightly by an invisible force, and no one could get in. Yang Saixia stood outside the door, watching all this through the glass, and felt a chill in her heart. Aaliyah was so afraid of Johnson, and the oppressive feeling was like hell. Why did this once silent ex-husband become so scary now? In the ward, Johnson slowly stood up, his shadow looming over Aaliyah. He whispered, "You witnessed Fiona's pain, but you helped her. Today, I will let you experience the despair she has experienced." No. Aaliyah shook her head like crazy, staggered, and rushed to the window to try to call for help, but found that the window did not move at all. She cried desperately, "Johnson, please forgive me. I was wrong. I really know I was wrong." Johnson leaned over slightly, staring down at her, a sneer on his lips. Wrong? Too late. He moved his fingertips lightly, and the airflow in the room seemed to freeze instantly. Aaliyah's face suddenly showed deep fear, and then she slowly knelt on the ground as if she had lost control. Yang Saixia, who was outside the door, heard the voice inside and knocked on the door in panic. "Johnson, are you crazy? Do you really want to kill someone? She's already like this. What on earth are you going to do?" Johnson ignored her, exhaled a puff of smoke coldly, and whispered, "One more time. Can you bear it?" His voice was low, but it hit Aaliyah's soul like a heavy hammer. Aaliyah collapsed to the ground, her eyes empty, like a puppet with its soul hollowed out. The doctors and nurses outside the ward were running around anxiously. Yang Saixiao's hands were shaking, and cold sweat was pouring down her back. She could no longer connect the Johnson in front of her with the unknown man in the past. Is he still a human? Yang Saixiao murmured to herself, her voice full of trembling. Chapter 023. Johnson in the ward acted as if nothing had happened. He could not hear the knocking on the door or the screaming outside. He just sat quietly on the sofa and looked at Aaliyah. The dark depth in his eyes became stronger and stronger. He finished his cigarette, giving Aaliyah enough time to feel fear. It was also telling her that even if the King of Heaven came, he couldn't save her today. "Aaliyah, you are the dean of the academy. From what I understand, you hold a lot of power. That's why you are so arrogant, and that's why you turn a deaf ear to my daughter's affairs. Those people in the school bullied my daughter, but you never cared about it. You even fanned the flames in secret and condoned it all, just because those people are richer than me, and because my daughter doesn't have a rich father. You turn a blind eye. Don't the poor have the right to live? Should the poor be bullied and humiliated by the rich second generation? Shouldn't the poor be treated equally?" Aaliyah's face changed. Her whole body was shaking. Her body curled up. She grabbed her hair with both hands, and she completely collapsed. All she could think about at this moment was Fiona. Fiona was bullied in school, locked in the bathroom and poured with cold water, isolated by her classmates, and even beaten with a bag over her head. She had seen or heard all of this, but she didn't care, because she knows that Fiona is just an ordinary person. She was lucky to be admitted to this institution. Studying in the same school as the descendants of these dignitaries was already a step above her station. What's wrong with her being wronged? What happened to her being bullied? Isn't it supposed to be like this for ordinary people who have no power or influence? She didn't know why Johnson was so angry. The person is already dead. Can't we just mourn and accept the change? My daughter is dead. Why not just have another one? Yang Saixia, who was outside the door, heard this. Her face became increasingly ugly. It turns out that Aaliyah was involved in Fiona's death. He even hit Fiona's body. No wonder Johnson was so angry and even became a different person. Johnson will definitely not be able to swallow Fiona's death. But did Johnson really want to kill Aaliyah in front of so many people? Is he crazy? But he and Ian Dongsheng came to ask Aaliyah to do something for him. She felt blushing and ashamed. Johnson finished smoking a cigarette and slowly took out a beige Taoist talisman from his pocket. There was a faint black aura coming from above. Aaliyah's eyes changed instantly when she saw the talisman. An inexplicable fear rose from her heels and hovered above her head, like a thread tying everything about her. Johnson clasped his hands together and moved very quickly. There were 14 hand gestures in total, and he completed them in less than 2 seconds. Now, there was only one last step left. He stopped his hands on the hooking gate hand seal, looked at Aaliyah, and sneered. When you go to hell, repent. Your heart is already black, so you might as well burn it. The words fell. Johnson closed his last hand gesture. Boom! Aaliyah's feet were suddenly on fire, burning up along her legs. In just a second or two, the burning pain spread along my legs. Ah! Fire! Put out the fire! My legs hurt so much. They're going to burn. Is there anyone who can save me? Aaliyah was in a state of panic, her legs bouncing in the air. But the flames only burned on her feet and did not cause any damage when they came into contact with sheets, papers, and other flammable items. It was totally for Aaliyah. Johnson put his left leg on his right leg and watched everything quietly. He was watching how an evil person struggled at the end of his life. Gradually, the flames spread to Aaliyah's stomach, chest, hands, and then her head. Her whole body was enveloped in flames. She was like a fireman and could not make any sound now. Only hissing sounds came out of her mouth. As soon as she opened her mouth, the flames carrying hot air poured into her mouth. This feeling of pain from the outside to the inside made her feel worse than death. She was even now recalling the feeling of jumping off the building. No matter how painful or terrifying that feeling was, it only lasted for a moment. Unlike now, when the flames were slowly burning my skin and devouring everything I had. This feeling is too hard to bear. She really regrets being alive now. How much better it would have been if she had died by jumping off the building last time. Why should we endure this torment? Outside the door, in the corridor, it was already quiet at this time. The doctors and nurses all covered their mouths and stared at the horrifying scene in disbelief. Who would believe this if they didn't see it with their own eyes? A living person was trapped in a sea of fire? Burns of this size are simply untreatable and are the most painful. The burning sensation would make her feel worse than death. Being burned to death, you can imagine. But from beginning to end, the man just lit a Taoist talisman. The screams in the ward gradually stopped. Aaliyah was burned like a charcoal. Her skin was burned all over her body, and her original appearance was unrecognizable. Only her threatening body language told people of her pain. The short 5 minutes seemed like a century to her. Until he died. She ended the greatest suffering in the world. Dead. She's dead? In the corridor, a young security guard asked subconsciously. The doctor next to him replied, That's right. It would be strange if he didn't die from the burns. This burn lasted for a full 5 minutes. Let alone 5 minutes. Even if it was 1 minute, it would be hopeless, such a large area of burns. It hurts just thinking about it. Johnson in the ward then stood up, straightened his clothes, and then pushed the door and walked out as if nothing had happened. Everyone made way for him, sweating profusely. No one dared to touch Johnson, not even to meet his eyes. Johnson walked away as if no one was around, until he disappeared from everyone's sight. At that moment, Yang Saixia also saw clearly the expression on his face. Johnson's face was calm, and his eyes were deep, as if he had no emotions. He had put Aaliyah through such agony, and yet he had acted like nothing had happened? What on earth has he been through these days? What did the pain of losing his daughter bring to him? How desperate and helpless must a person be to become disappointed with the world? Yang Saixia kept asking herself in her heart whether she could do the same as Johnson, disregarding everything for her daughter. You can give up everything you have. Let those evildoers pay the price. Every time the answer is vague to her. She couldn't change much for Fiona, let alone fight for her or anyone else. I never considered Fiona as my daughter at all. She just wants Fiona to take care of her in her old age. She just wants to use Fiona. Johnson said he would risk his life for justice for his daughter. Then this matter will never be the end. Yang Saixia had a hunch. Johnson may change the world. Chapter 24. Always treat her like a child. Johnson left, the police arrived. People at the hospital told the police that Aaliyah's body was on the ground. But the people from the police bureau still conducted an appraisal according to the procedures. Aaliyah, the director of Gaofeng Academy. The police department brought the body to the station and directly notified Aaliyah's family and the school to deal with it. It was burned like this, all the evidence is gone. And when it comes to evidence, they have enough. The key now is that there is no conviction. There is surveillance in this ward. Li Xinmei and her companions checked the surveillance video immediately, but the images in the video made her face turn dark instantly. It's quite different from the previous situation. Johnson was present in all of them, but there is no evidence that he was the one who did it. This time, it's even more weird. Johnson simply took out a Taoist talisman, gestured a few times, and then lit it. Aaliyah on the opposite side was burned. Like a fantasy novel. This can't be evidence. They could only suppress the matter and then slowly find a solution. Johnson returned home. He took off his shirt and looked at the skin injuries he had suffered previously. I'm basically recovered now. Feng Wuji swallowed several evil souls and replenished his own strength. Johnson's mind was now filled with images of Aaliyah burning to death. He did not feel any regret or guilt in his heart. On the contrary, he was excited. That was the exhilarating feeling that only revenge can bring. Johnson, you are still a little rusty at drawing spells and casting incantations, but it won't be long before your soul awakens. When the time comes, I will be able to draw talismans and cast spells, summon heavenly thunder, raise corpses, and control the celestial phenomena. All of these will be easy to do. Feng Wuji's voice came over. After eating Aaliyah's evil soul, he seemed very satisfied and smacked his lips. Johnson didn't know how strong Feng Wuji was when he was alive. He only knew that he seemed to have been completely transformed since the day he irrigated him. The things that exist in the blood are also slowly rising and awakening. He doesn't care about anything else, nor does he care how far he can go. He just wanted to kill all those who should be killed and seek justice for his daughter. Johnson pushed open his daughter's room. This was the first time he entered Fiona's room since Fiona's accident. He always felt that Fiona was still there. Maybe when I open the door, Fiona will still turn around and smile at me, calling me Dad sweetly, just like when she was a child. But he knew that scene would never happen again. Fiona is dead, left this world forever in pain. Johnson sat on Fiona's bed, tears falling uncontrollably. Fiona, Daddy misses you so much. If God has his will, then I hope I can be reunited with you after death. If you have already reached that world, you must take good care of yourself. Wait for me to finish dealing with things here, and wait for me to kill the last person. Then we, father and daughter, will be reunited. Buzz. Johnson's phone vibrated in his pocket. It's Fiona's cell phone, given to him by the police when they returned Fiona's personal belongings. His cell phone had been broken a long time ago, so he went to a cell phone shop and spent a lot of money to get it repaired. He felt that there might be some important clues in this. A person's name was ringing on the phone. Fan Shui. Johnson had some impression of this person. This was a good friend of Fiona's. She had come to Fiona's house for dinner. The two of them were laughing and seemed to be very close. Johnson took a deep breath and picked up the phone. Hello, is that Uncle? Fan Shui was silent for a moment and asked hurriedly. Well, Uncle, please accept my condolences for Fiona's matter. We are all very sad about this matter. I've been crying for a whole day and night. I feel sad when I think of Fiona. Johnson's eyes instantly turned red. Fiona's death has dealt the greatest blow to those closest to her. Fan Shui was probably also sad for a while. But I don't know if it's an illusion, but listening to Fan Shui's voice doesn't seem that uncomfortable. What's up, Fan Shui? Johnson asked. Uncle, can you come to the dormitory and take back Fiona's personal belongings? The school said that Fiona's personal belongings must be taken away as soon as possible. Fan Shui said weakly. Oh, I see. I'll be there right away. Johnson thought that he hadn't had time to go to Fiona's academy to pack her things. Fiona is no longer here, so I have to take her things back myself. This time when Johnson went to the academy, no one dared to stop him. The security guard at the door politely let him in and just made him register, and told him the direction of the female host. At this time, all the girls in the school were free and it was daytime, so Johnson reported to the social manager and went upstairs. Fiona used to live in room 403. As soon as he came up, Johnson's eyes stopped on the pile of garbage in the corner. It looked like the dormitory had just undergone a thorough cleaning, as there was a lot of discarded garbage piled up here that had not yet been cleaned up. The first thing he saw was a shiny object. That's the hairpin Fiona wore. Johnson bent down to pick it up and wiped it on his clothes. This hairpin has a cartoon pattern and has a cute little bell on it. It matches Fiona's quirky personality very well. This hairpin is a gift from myself to Fiona. On her birthday when she was in junior high school. Every year after that, she would wear this hairpin and loved it very much. Johnson still remembers how happy she was when she first received and distributed the card. She jumped up and down like a child and spun around herself several times. She wore the hairpin to bed that night. Johnson closed his eyes now. All that appeared in his mind was Fiona happily hugging him and kissing him madly on the cheek. Johnson shook his head helplessly and couldn't help laughing. As I was laughing, I felt a bitterness at the corner of my mouth. He cried. The tears fell silently. When a person dies, any memories related to that moment become the most hurtful things. It turns out that he has always treated Fiona as a child. Until now, he has not been able to accept the reality that Fiona is dead. Fiona is the pain of his life. It is a hurdle that he will never be able to overcome. Johnson's fists clenched gradually. This hairpin is very important to him and Fiona, and it contains so many beautiful memories. Now, it is thrown in the trash. That's not all. Fiona's previous belongings in the garbage dump. Books with her name on them, clothes she had worn, pencil cases, and some toys that only girls like to play with. Each of these was familiar to Johnson. Seeing them is like seeing the vivid Fiona appearing in front of you. Johnson squatted down, took out all the things his daughter had used from the garbage pile one by one, and held them tightly in his arms. Soon, he found a finely crafted waterproof envelope. This is Fiona's handwritten letter. Now, it is just thrown on the ground and into the sewage. Fiona's delicate handwriting seems to be alive. It reads to Father Johnson. This is a letter Fiona left for herself. Chapter 0, 25 Humble and Kind. Seeing the handwriting is like seeing the person. Johnson watched it all with tears in his eyes. His world collapsed once again. He didn't know how desperate Fiona was when she wrote this letter. He really didn't dare to think about it. Every word made him feel like his heart was being cut by a knife. Dad, I'm sorry. Although I have already written this letter, I dare not show it to you. I am afraid that you will worry, and that you will come to the school impulsively to cause trouble. I know it is not easy for me to come to this school. I just want to graduate safely. It's okay to suffer a little grievance. It's a blessing to suffer a loss. But all this is too hard to bear. The life in the academy is so stressful that I can't breathe. I always remember what you said to me. So when someone bullied me, I never thought of resisting, let alone fighting with them. But why? It seems that the more I give in, the more they go too far. It's not easy to be patient. It seems that everyone is against me, and it seems that the way they look at me is full of mockery. I really don't want to live even one more day like this, being excluded by others. But I can't drop out of school. I can't let you down. I have always been your pride. People are all made of flesh and blood. No matter how evil they are, they won't kill me, right? Dad, they're calling me over when I write this letter. I believe there are no absolutely bad people in this world. I will explain everything to them later, and everything should be fine. Dad, I'll be home early tonight and make your favorite braised hairtail fish. Signed, Daughter Fiona. Johnson's tears dripped onto the envelope. This is the letter my daughter wrote to herself the day before the accident. He couldn't imagine what kind of mood his daughter was in when she wrote this letter. My daughter never thought of resisting. Even at the last step, she still wanted to discuss a solution with those people. She still believed that there were good people in this world. But in the end, she lost her life. Blindly enduring will only result in something even more excessive. Johnson still remembers that his daughter said that she would cook for him when she came back that day, and also said that she had something to tell him. This must be the matter. She wanted to tell herself how difficult her days in the academy were, but that everything had been resolved and she had made peace with those people. Fiona is a simple and kind-hearted child, and she was tolerant until the end. Her patience is not cowardice. Johnson clenched his fists. But should kindness be bullied? Should honest people be endlessly exploited? Should I become a victim in the hands of those people? The letter from his daughter did not mean to blame him at all, but Johnson just couldn't get over it in his heart. If I had been more careful at the beginning, if I had cared more about my daughter, then perhaps these things would not have happened. Tears rolled down Johnson's cheeks and dripped onto the ground. His heart felt as if it was being dug out. There is a kind of sadness called powerlessness. This feeling lingers in his heart like a nightmare that cannot be shaken off. Now all that came to his mind was how desperate Fiona was when she was bullied by those people. She cried and begged for mercy and spoke soft words to those people, but in return she got even more excessive things. It was their torture and abuse. Fiona's bravery was not worth mentioning at all, but rather ridiculous. I have taught my daughter to be tolerant and to accept losses as a blessing, but who could have thought that things would turn out like this? Senior Feng Wuji, can you summon my daughter's soul back? I miss her so much. Even if I could just say a few words to her, I'll be satisfied. I beg you. Johnson cried helplessly for Feng Wuji. Feng Wuji said helplessly, I can't do it. If it were my prime, I might be able to do it, but now I am powerless and my 7 souls are unstable. It is impossible for me to do it. Besides, your daughter's soul has already dissipated. Johnson knelt on the ground helplessly, crying bitterly. He counted Fiona's things and packed them into the prepared bag. Each of these is a memory Fiona left for herself. Thing related to Fiona that can be caught in this world. At this time, the voices of several women talking nearby could be heard. It's so annoying. There's a bunch of garbage taking up my closet. Why does she have so much garbage? I can't throw it all away. What on earth is that woman Fiona thinking? Does she think the school is her home? Is that why there are so many garbage? Fortunately, I notified her father to come and take away her garbage, which saved me a lot of trouble. The person who spoke was Fan Shui. She is Fiona's best friend. If Johnson hadn't heard it with his own ears, he would have thought there was something wrong with his hearing. Isn't Fan Shui Fiona's best friend? How could she say such a thing? That's how it is when people leave and tea gets cold. Fan Shui, didn't the school ask you to pack up all of Fiona's things and throw them away? You're really kind enough to ask her father to take her things away. You two are really good friends. She's gone, but you're still helping her. A woman complimented him. Fan Shui snorted coldly, with great disdain, as if she had heard a joke. What a shitty bestie. I'm just afraid of trouble. Do you know how much stuff Fiona brought to the academy? She is such a poor girl that she even uses old toothpaste. She is so reluctant to buy new ones. Her family's financial situation doesn't allow her to come to Gaofeng Academy. She and I are best friends? Humph, is she worthy of being my sister? I wish I had never met her. Now that she's dead, it's just right. Her locker is mine, If you guys have nothing to do, please help me throw her garbage out the door and let her poor father take it away. I never want to see anything related to her again, Fan Shui said as she was still cleaning up and throwing things outside. This included some of Fiona's personal clothing and other items. Watching these things being thrown on the ground, Johnson felt like his heart was being trampled on once again. He walked over silently and pushed the door open to enter the room. Oh, Uncle, you're here. When Fan Shui saw Johnson, she quickly took back her words and acted like a good girl. These things on the ground are Fiona's things. Uncle, please take them away. Otherwise, the school will get rid of all her things. Well, don't come in. The things are all at the door. Fan Shui's tone was filled with disgust. Fan Shui muttered quietly. What a poor girl, just like Fiona, like father, like daughter. Johnson said nothing, turning and walking to the door. Fiona's clothes were thrown in a mess at the door, but she had washed every piece of clothing very cleanly. My daughter has been frugal since she was young. When she reported to school, she took all her personal belongings and toiletries with her. Johnson told her to buy a new one, but she didn't because she was afraid of wasting it. Because she knew how hard it was for Johnson to make money. My own daughter, such a humble and kind woman. How could she become like this? Chapter 26. He, a poor man. Seeing Johnson squatting down obediently at the door to organize Fiona's things, Fan Shui laughed even more shamelessly. Several women in the dormitory also started to make sarcastic remarks. So this is Fiona's father. He is just like Fiona. How can I put it? Fiona's current situation is inseparable from her father. Education is a big problem. Our identities are different from Fiona's. If we leave these things in the dormitory, I'm afraid it will bring bad luck to us. Fan Shui simply didn't want to pretend anymore, and her arrogant look gradually emerged. Fiona is already dead. Why should I keep pretending? Besides, Fiona and I are just fake sisters. Fiona? It's just a tool in your hands. I'm just using her. Originally, Johnson didn't want to argue with her. In his opinion, these women were mentally immature, so it was understandable that they said some crazy things. What's more, my daughter is no longer here. But when he was packing up, he found an exquisite little notebook. That's Fiona's diary. He remembered that Fiona always had the habit of keeping a diary. The contents of the diary stunned Johnson for a moment. The anger in my heart was also gushing out wildly. It turns out that everything was because of Fan Shui. It turns out that this woman is the culprit. Johnson didn't understand. They are obviously good friends. So why do you force others to become her stepping stones? She feel bad for stepping on Fiona's body? Does she still have any humanity? The truth of the matter made Johnson so angry that his hands were shaking. At first, those people targeted not Fiona, but Fan Shui. Fan Shui's family conditions are not as good as Fiona's, and she came from the countryside. On the first day, Fan Shui was laughed at, ridiculed, and even blocked in the bathroom where she dared not come out. But she was just a country girl. How could she dare to challenge these rich, powerful, and gorgeously dressed city people? The more she tolerated them, the more they went too far. Finally, Fiona couldn't stand it anymore and stood up to speak for her, accompanied her to eat, fetched her water, and helped her study. But the final result is actually ironic. In order to blend into that circle of people, Fan Shui betrayed Fiona. He took the initiative to play the double dealer, pushed Fiona in front of those people, and bullied Fiona together with those people. It's even getting worse. Fiona is her token of allegiance. Fiona's kindness was exploited by her and treated as something that could be traded. Fiona, my own daughter. Is she so cheap? Now that Fiona is dead, Fan Shui has no intention of repenting at all. Instead, she is still slandering her. Fan Shui was already packing her own things. Put all her things in Fiona's cupboard. There are all some cheap-looking cosmetics, clothes, and so on. Johnson stood in the doorway, his face darkening. The black aura was slowly rising into his pupils. Fan Shui, Fiona treats you as a friend, and you treat her like this? She was bullied by those people because of you, and you betrayed her? Fiona is dead. Won't your conscience hurt? So what if I betrayed her? Seeing that Johnson already knew the truth, Fan Shui was not nervous at all. Instead, she sneered at Johnson. He's a poor guy. I am a student of Gaofeng Academy. What can he do to me? People like Fiona don't deserve to go to school here. She wants to get into the circle of rich second generations. It's just a pipe dream. Fiona to kneel down and apologize to me where you stood. As Fan Shui said this, the smile on her face grew more and more proud. The two women next to them couldn't help but burst out laughing. If you hadn't mentioned it, I would have almost forgotten that Fiona stole your things that day, and you caught her in the act. She even begged you not to tell the instructor. What a pathetic creature. Not only is his family poor, but he also likes to steal and do thieves. That day, the three of us fought, and each of us slapped her several times. What could you do to us? This is what a thief like her deserves. Johnson was stunned, then yelled, Bullshit, my daughter can't be a thief. Fan Shui laughed the happiest, as if a villain had succeeded. Yeah, we all know that my cosmetics were not stolen by her. I framed her. I just wanted to find an excuse to deal with her. Haha, Shui, you were so mean. I was wondering why Fiona kept crying and complaining about her grievance that day. But it doesn't matter. I had a lot of fun beating her that day. My hands are all swollen. Who will want to play with a poor girl? Humph, garbage. Fiona is poor, not as good as these rich people. But what about Fan Shui? She is also from the country and doesn't have much money. She used Fiona to cover up everything about herself, and even took the lead in bullying and framing Fiona. The demon in Johnson's heart can no longer be suppressed. I see. It seems that you have never realized your mistake. Until now, you think Fiona deserves it. Johnson walked in, calmer than before, and sat at the door. He lit a cigarette and took a puff. Who let you into our dormitory? Get out. You're still smoking here. Don't you know that smoking is prohibited in the dormitory? It stinks. When Fan Shui saw him come in, she glared at him with her eyes wide open and yelled like a shrew. Another woman also hurriedly said, I'll go find the school's security guards. Bang! As soon as she reached the door, it was closed by an unknown force. She was startled and her whole body trembled. What do you want to do? Poor bastard, the woman glared at Johnson and yelled. Puff! Next second, a bloody cut suddenly appeared on her arm. It felt like someone had stabbed me with something from a distance. She was stunned for a moment, her whole body felt empty, and it took her a long time to come back to her senses. Ah, my arm, this. What's going on? She screamed, accompanied by severe pain. She was terrified when her fair little arms suddenly became like this. Fan Shui and the other woman were also stunned. What happened just now? None of them saw how Johnson attacked. How did the woman's arm suddenly get cut? Johnson held a Taoist talisman in his hand, with blood-red Taoist characters flashing on it. He flicked his fingers lightly, and the talisman instantly burned and turned into ashes out of thin air. Suddenly, the air around seemed to solidify. The black air poured in fiercely. The whole dormitory seemed to have fallen into hell. Johnson bit the cigarette. His voice gradually became colder. Dark energy floated in his eyes, and the corners of his mouth were slightly raised. He seemed to be smiling, but in fact he was already burning with anger. Fan Shui, you may not know how precious Fiona values the friendship between you two. She told me that you were her best friend in the academy. She invited you to her home for dinner, talked to you heart to heart, and chose to stand by you when everyone else was ostracizing you. But you betrayed her just to avoid being bullied and put her in an extremely embarrassing situation. Now it seems that all this is because of you. If it weren't for you, my daughter wouldn't have gotten into trouble. Are you ready to go to hell? Chapter 27, She is Stronger Than Me. What? Go to hell? Fan Shui and her friends had just arrived at the academy this morning. They had not heard about what happened before and naturally did not know about the death of the security guard and Aaliyah. When they heard this, they covered their faces and laughed, thinking they had heard a joke, because the word going to hell is really too far away from them. Even if she did a lot of bad things, even if she betrayed Fiona, isn't Fan Shui still living well? Just because of the person in front of you, you want to send yourself to hell? Is this the most ridiculous thing in the world? Haha, I'm dying of laughter. Is this person mentally ill? He actually said such a thing in a serious manner. Do you think you are God? And you want us to go to hell? I think this uncle would be a good actor in a play. You are quite good at pretending. No wonder Fiona is so good at pretending. You poor bastards, we are completely different from you. We are all top students. Do you dare to touch us? The only person in the room who was injured by the knife was the woman who was gritting her teeth gently. However, her expression was extremely ferocious. She did not believe that the wound on her arm was related to Johnson at all. She kept telling herself in her heart that it was all an illusion. All an illusion. Whoosh! Phew! Another knife, this time it chopped straight towards Fan Shui. Ah! Fan Shui was still laughing in the previous second, and fell to the ground with a scream in the next second. A knife mark appeared on her thigh. It was covered in blood, and the cut was as long as a finger. The smell of blood instantly filled her nostrils, and she rolled on the ground in pain, shaking all over. This made the three women in the dormitory stop laughing. They all looked towards Johnson. This is not a joke. What happened just now was not an accident. Johnson really cast a spell to cause these bloody wounds on their bodies. In their opinion, it is impossible for someone to be so evil. How did he do all this? Johnson narrowed his eyes and looked at them quietly, with a hint of amusement in his voice. From now on, every 30 seconds, the three of you will be stabbed randomly until you go to hell. I don't think you three can hold out for more than a few minutes. But it's hard to say. It seems like you have quite a strong vitality. There was a dark aura lingering in Johnson's pupils. When he looked at them, it made the three of them feel uneasy. For a moment, they felt like they had fallen into hell. Ever since there was a hint of darkness in Johnson's eyes, he became bloodthirsty and crazy, turning a blind eye to the blood around him. It seemed as if he was playing a game. Johnson, you are crazy. Fiona's death has nothing to do with us. Fan Shui yelled hurriedly. She was so angry. She had been taking good care of her legs, but now they were in such a state. This will leave a scar. How will I wear shorts in the future? She must settle this matter with Johnson today. Call the police quickly. Everyone call the police. Yes, let the police arrest him. He really is a lunatic. The three of them reacted immediately and took out their cell phones to make a call. But there was no signal on their cell phones, and they couldn't make a single call. Soon the 30 seconds were up, and another woman was stabbed. The cut on her back made her feel excruciating pain. She fell to the ground with blood gushing down her back. Looking at Johnson again, it was as if nothing had happened. He was enjoying the scene while smoking. Only then did they feel a chill rising from their backs. Johnson is not joking. He really wants to kill them all. The pain from the previous stab wound was unbearable. If they were stabbed every 30 seconds, it would be unbearable. How could they bear it? Especially Fan Shui. Her eyes were wide open, full of fear. It felt like there was a dark cloud overhead, very gloomy. She just didn't want to accept it. Why should I suffer like this? Isn't it just killing Fiona? Fiona? She's just a poor person. There are plenty of poor people in this world. Whoosh. Whoosh. Time is passing, and the invisible sword is flying. 2 minutes later, Fan Shui was stabbed twice, and the other two were stabbed once each. Because a blood vessel was cut just now, one of the women's blood spurted out instantly, and the blood hung on the wall. The white walls became dirty in an instant. The three of them couldn't bear it anymore in a blink of an eye. Every cut is deep and deep. The key is that they have no idea which direction the knife is coming from, let alone where the next knife will land on them. This feeling of the unknown is the most terrifying. Fan Shui no longer had the high attitude she had just now. She looked like a blood gourd, with blood gushing out of her body. In the moment of pause, she was stabbed again in the arm. One of her arms had drooped down and could not be lifted up. The intense pain made her face turn pale, and she cried out at the top of her lungs. "I'm sorry, I was wrong. I shouldn't have bullied Fiona. In fact, I asked Fiona to protect me because I was timid. Fiona is much braver than me. She's a good person, and I am a bad guy, an idiot, a bastard. But if I hadn't pushed Fiona out, then those people would have bullied me. I didn't want to be bullied. I didn't want to end up like that, and I didn't know what to do, so I betrayed Fiona." As expected, they will only bully Fiona from now on and not target me. I can't do anything about it. Plus, Fiona is much stronger than me. I think she can handle it. She can do it better than me. Hearing these words, Johnson laughed out loud in self-deprecation. Just because Fiona is stronger than her, just because they have a good relationship, and just because Fan Shui is timid and fearful. So, she pushed her precious daughter out and stand on the same front with those people to bully her? This is simply bandit logic. Fiona is kind by nature, so she would not just ignore something like this, which also gave Fan Shui enough excuses to do all this. "Uncle, it's all my fault. Please give me a chance to change for the better. Okay? I will never do such a thing again. I will visit Fiona's grave every week. Can you forgive me?" Fan Shui knelt on the ground and said with tears streaming down her face. Johnson's eyes turned red. It wasn't because Fan Shui knelt down to him. Instead, he thought about the injustices his daughter had experienced. This world is too unfriendly to them, father and daughter. It brought Fiona nothing but endless pain. Johnson's eyes flashed with a dark and deep murderous intent, and the corners of his mouth rose slightly. "I am only responsible for sending you to hell. As for whether he forgives you or not, that is the business of the king of hell. It has nothing to do with me. You three can still be together on the road to the underworld, so you won't be lonely, right? This is the last favor I can give you." Fan Shui and the other two immediately started crying. "We don't want to be accompanied on the road to the underworld. We don't want to die. Uncle, please forgive us." Chapter 028, I'll never forget it. Screams tore through the quiet dormitory building. Every 30 seconds, a scream was heard accompanied by the sound of a knife cutting through flesh, which made people's scalps numb. Fan Shui knelt in a pool of blood. Fear had drained her strength, and she could only breathe with difficulty. The roommates around her were either crying or twitching, and some had even lost their lives. Outside the door, more and more people gathered. The dormitory manager hurriedly squeezed into the crowd, listening to the tragic screams inside. His heart seemed to be tightened. "Who is making trouble in there?" A person next to him answered in a low voice. "It's Fiona's father, Johnson." Hearing this name, the dormitory manager's hands trembled and his face turned pale. "Johnson, it's him again." This middle-aged man, who couldn't be more ordinary, seemed to have become a different person after his daughter Fiona died. The police suspected him and kept watching him, but they failed again and again. Whenever someone related to Fiona's case died, Johnson was always there, but he never left any evidence. His actions were like a ghost, cold and precise, as if an evil ghost had come to the world for revenge. And now, he appeared here. In the dormitory, Fan Shui was covered in blood. She struggled to raise her head, her voice trembling like a mosquito's hum. "Chin? Johnson, let me go. I didn't mean to." She didn't stand firmly that day. "We didn't mean to kill her." Johnson stood in front of her, his hands in his pockets, his expression as cold as the wind of hell. He didn't say anything, just took out a cigarette, lit it, and slowly exhaled a puff of white smoke. Do you regret it? His voice was calm, but it was like a sharp blade piercing Fan Shui's heart. I was really wrong. Please let me go. Don't kill me. Don't let me die. Fan Shui's tears and blood mixed together, and she fell to the ground like a puddle of mud. However, in response to her, Johnson sneered. When you get to hell, you can slowly repent. The last knife fell. Fan Shui's eyes widened. Blood gushed out of her neck like a fountain. Her head rolled to the ground, her eyes forever frozen in fear and despair. The door opened, and Johnson walked out of the room carrying Fiona's belongings, his face expressionless. He walked past the crowd and said coldly, "Those who do evil must pay the price." Everyone looked into the dormitory and screamed. Inside the room, several bodies were lying in all directions. Blood stained the floor, and the air was filled with a strong smell of blood. Devour the evil spirits and awaken the power. Johnson was walking on the campus road, but his heart was unusually calm. The three evil spirits had been devoured by Feng Wuji, and he could clearly feel that the power in his body was awakening. Black air surged out of his palm inadvertently, and the Taoist magic seemed to be at his fingertips. Feng Wuji's voice entered his mind. Well done. These evil spirits taste wonderful. If there are a few more, my soul will be completely restored. By then, the whole world will tremble under our feet. Xiao family courtyard. Xiao Sheng and Xiao Jie had just finished the funeral for Qiao Xiumei. The police station was powerless to do anything about what happened that day. It means there is no way to convict Johnson. This matter still requires new evidence. The key point is that when Qiao Xiumei jumped from the building, Johnson was not in the building at all. She went upstairs and jumped down by herself. The police department cannot act recklessly when doing their work. Dad, are we just going to let my mom's matter go? Xiao Jie was so angry that he barely slept in the past 2 days. My mother is dead.